Welcome to Friendly Math 101. Today's lesson will be over the quadratic formula, just some extra practice. Remember, when we're solving quadratic equations, our quadratic equation always has to be equal to 0. In this case, it already is. So our next step is to go ahead and label our a, b, and c values. The a value is always the number attached to the x squared. So in this case, a is equal to 2. The b value is always connected to the x. So in this case, b equals -11. The c value is the constant, the one without a variable. In this case, -21. Now that we have our a, b, and c value listed, all we need to do is plug it into the quadratic formula. If you remember, the quadratic formula is opposite of b. Opposite of b here would be +11, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so -11 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is -21. All of that is divided by 2 times a, which is 2. When we're solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, we always want to figure out what goes under the square root next. So I'm going to rewrite my 11, my plus or minus, and my square root. Now I'm going to just type in my calculator everything underneath the square root to figure out what number goes underneath the square root. When you type all that in, you get 289. Then we can go ahead and multiply the bottom as well. 2 times 2 is 4. After you figure out what goes underneath the square root, the next step is to take the square root. The square root of 289 is 17, so I'm going to replace the square root of 289 with just a 17. Now that we have this, we can break it up into a plus and a minus, so we're going to have two answers. So I'll have one equation where it's 11 plus 17 divided by 4, and one where it's 11 minus 17 divided by 4. You always want to figure out what the top is first. So add first and then divide. 11 plus 17 is 28. Divide that by 4 and we get 7. So one of our answers is x equals 7. 11 minus 17 is -6. Divide that by 4. That's going to give us a decimal, but let's just reduce the fraction to -3/2. So our second answer is going to be -3/2, or -3/2. Those are our two answers. Okay, moving on to our next example here. Again, we have to make sure we're equal to 0. In this case we are, so we can label our a, b, and c. The a value is attached to the x squared. That's going to be my 4. The b value is attached to the x, which is 7. The c value is the constant at the end, which in this case is -1. Then we need to plug everything into the quadratic formula. So it's going to be opposite of b, or -7, plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times 4 times -1, all divided by 2 times 4. Again, our first step is to figure out what number goes underneath the square root, and I'm going to go ahead and multiply the bottom there. 2 times 4 is 8. So if I were to type all of this into my calculator here, I would get 65. Now, 65, if I take the square root of it, is a decimal, which means I'm just going to leave it as a square root. However, I need to make sure that the square root of 65 is completely reduced. So what I need to do is draw my table so we can do the prime factorization of 65. So off to the side here, I'm going to draw my table. The first number that I know, remember I use the prime numbers 2, 3, 5, and 7. 2 won't go into 65, 3 won't go into 65, but 5 does go into 65. And so I can divide 65 by 5, I get 13. 13 is prime, so that's the end of my table there, and it comes to the outside. I want to circle my pairs. In this case, I don't have any pairs, which means the square root of 65 is already completely reduced. So my answer is going to be x equals -7 plus or minus the square root of 65 over 8. That is my entire answer because I cannot reduce that any further. Okay, moving on to our last example here. Again, we need to make sure we're equal to 0, and in this case we are. If not, we would have to move over some numbers. So our next step is to label our A, B, and C values. A in this case would be -2, B would be +4, C would be +11. Plug them into your quadratic formula, which is opposite of B, so -4, plus or minus the square root of B squared, so 4 squared, minus 4 times A, which is -2, times C, which is 11, all divided by 2 times A, which is -2. Again, we need to figure out what goes underneath the square root, and I'll go ahead and multiply the bottom. I get -4. Underneath the square root there, once I plug that in my calculator, I'm going to get 104. Now again, if I took the square root of 104, it would give me a decimal. So what I want to do is reduce the radical. So again, I'm going to cut off a little corner here to draw my table so I can break up my 104 into prime factors. The first number, prime number that goes into 104 is 2. When I divide, I get 52. I can divide by 2 again. I'm going to get 26. Divide by 2 again, I get 13. 13 is prime, and so it comes out to the outside of the table. Then you circle the pairs. So I'll circle the pairs here. One pair of 2's, that's all I have. So the square root of 104 actually becomes 2 square root of whatever's left, which would be 26. So I would rewrite this as x equals -4 plus or minus 2, because one of the numbers from the pair comes outside the square root. Whatever's left, you multiply together inside. So 2 square root of 26 divided by -4. That's not actually my final answer because I can reduce all 3 of these numbers by a 2. I actually want to reduce by a -2 to get rid of this negative here. So I'm going to divide every number here by -2 except for the square root. So -4 divided by -2 first, I would get +2 plus or minus 2 divided by -2 is -1. Now I just can write 1 and then you rewrite the square root of 26. The reason I wouldn't write -1 here is because it would change the sign in the middle, but since I have both signs, it doesn't matter. On the bottom, -4, divide that by 2, -2, I'm sorry, and you get +2 there. And so this right here would be your answer. X equals 2 plus or minus 1 square root of 26 over 2. And of course, you don't need the 1 in front of the square root sign. Thank you for watching, and for more math tutorials, please subscribe to our channel, Friendly Math 101.